Thank you for clicking on the video. Today, I'm going to talk about my home theater and why I did a standard 5.1 speaker setup instead of a 7.1 or a Dolby Atmos setup here in this home theater. Okay. First, before I get into the topic today, I just wanted to say thank you to all the people who've viewed my content so far and the 10 or 11 of you out there that have subscribed to my channel. That's greatly appreciated and way more support than I thought I'd probably have at this point after only posting a handful of videos, and I've only been doing this for a couple months. So to everyone who's watched my videos and everyone who's subscribed so far, I greatly appreciate it. It's way more than I thought I would get at this point. So I just wanted to say that up front to everyone. That being said, on to the topic at hand here today. So this video is going to be about why here in this home theater, I have just a 5.1 setup instead of a 7.1 or a Dolby Atmos setup, something with like wide channels and the in ceiling speakers and things like that. So, to preface all this and how I came to this setup situation, when I first built out the home theater, after I had obviously had just my initial speakers and TV and everything in here when we first moved in, when I first started making it a proper home theater with actual speakers and multi-channel and everything, I had a 7.1 setup in here, and at that time, as you've seen in my previous videos where I did my home theater tours, my detailed tours, and talked about my home theater, the room was flipped. So off here to the left, on this side would have been the screen, and off to that side would have been the equipment wall, and my projector would have been hanging from the ceiling over in this area somewhere. And when I had that set up, I had a 7.1 system in here initially, and I had my two freestanding tower speakers, the older ones I had at the time, in the front, and then I had four Pioneer, the Andrew Jones Pioneer, I forget the model number, but the Andrew Jones Pioneer tower speakers for my left and right surround and my left and right rear speaker. And it was kind of cluttered in here. I didn't have as many decor items and other things in here that I have now. But the way the room was set up, especially with it being flip flopped and having more width to the room instead of depth, caused some problems. So I originally had that 7 speaker setup, and the side speakers were really close to some of the seating. The rear speakers were right on the people that were sitting in the back row, because I still had these two couches. I still had this couch I'm sitting on in the front and the couch in the back behind it, but they were just oriented differently in the room. And so the surrounds didn't really fit that well. But I kept it like that for quite a while. And then I did end up getting some outdoor speakers. I think they were just Insignia brand outdoor speakers from Best Buy that I actually zip tied to the grid for the drop ceiling. And I had two sets of them, so four total. So I had two kind of situated towards the front of the room at that time, and two situated more towards the rear of the room. And while I had that, and I did listen to different Atmos uh, content and DTSX and everything, uh, I started to shy away from that when I redid the room like this. And the main reason was because my ceilings, I don't think, are tall enough in here to really create the separation for the channels. So back then, when I had my Atmos channel set up, Yeah, you could hear certain things, rain and whatever pass overhead, or a plane or a helicopter fly by in different movies. But the problem was a lot of the sound would just kind of get muddled in with all the standard bed layer speakers that I had. There wasn't a lot of height separation, you know. And so when everything happened, as I talked about in my other videos, and my cabinets fell down and my projector fell down, and we decided to redo the room here and rotate everything the opposite way so we would have more depth to the room and less width to the room. Um, I initially had a 7.1 system, and I modified my height speakers. Instead of having them hang from the ceiling, like I had originally, I flip flopped them and made them height channels that were on the front wall and on the back wall behind me. So, as I mentioned again in that detailed home theater tour video, I have two shelves that are next to the main projector screen that are above my left and right front speakers. And what I had done originally is I placed two speakers up there and made them height channels for the front. And then behind me, where you can kind of see, I put two rear height channels back there. And then I tried to position other speakers still to the sides and then behind the couch that was back here. And again, the Atmos speakers, the height channels, essentially didn't really do anything. It just sounded like one big speaker, and I didn't get the separation. And so at that point, I decided I was going to do away with the height channels. And so I got rid of those insignia speakers, and I sold them and got whatever money I could get out of them. And so then I was still sitting with a 7.1 system. And the 7.1 I stuck with for quite a while before I finally ditched the extra set aside speakers and just settled on a 5.1. And so what I had done when I got rid of the Atmos like height speakers is I kind of moved things around a little bit and was playing around with the 7.1 system. And so I would sit two speakers on the back wall. And by the way, I had gotten rid of the tower speakers because the way this room is set up now, I felt like it wouldn't work to have the tower speakers sitting on the floor to the sides or trying to fit them behind. So that's when I went out and I bought a pair of the Polk FXI A6s and a Polk FXI A4 set. And I got them both at the same time from two different sellers, but through Facebook Marketplace. Just coincidentally, they were both up for sale around the same time, and I managed to buy both of them at the same time a handful of years ago. I did it within like a week or two of each other when I bought them. So anyway, so I toyed with the 7.1 setup with that. So I would put the left and right speaker kind of in the mid wall, and hang it on the wall with brackets. And then I would sit two in the rear, on brackets. And I played with how wide to put them and how narrow behind the rear, row on the back wall. And I kind of moved the side ones up and back. And I didn't really like how it worked. And partly because this room is uneven. Not only, as I mentioned in again, I'm going to refer to this a bunch of times, the detailed home theater tour, where these walls aren't exactly square in any, wall in this room. Not only that, back over this way, you may not have been able to tell, but I'll probably show some B-roll of it. This room isn't completely square. It like notches out and goes in and then comes back around in this corner. So I didn't have equal distance to all my speakers. So I can get, from the main listening position and the rear couches pretty good for the center and the front speakers, because it's heading in this direction and it kind of works out. But for the side surrounds or a rear surround in a 7.1, I was never able to get an equal listening distance. I could kind of do it with the rears if I position them enough to where it hit the microphone, in the center position here the right way. They may not exactly be equal to each other, but I could get them equal to the microphone. But the side speakers posed a lot of problems because since the room is uneven and you have that notch cut out on this side, I was ending up having a side speaker over here that was only 6 or 7 feet, roughly, or 8 feet from the main listening position. And then the other one was like double that. So the other one was like 16 feet away. And so it caused a lot of problems with getting the delay and timing and the volume level of each speaker, would be way different and cause different things. Not to mention these speakers, since they're dipole bipole, they're not direct radiating, so you're getting a more diffuse sound coming out of them. So that also played with the acoustics in a weird situation. So I ended up playing with a lot of that. And then I decided, after watching some videos online on YouTube and reading on some forums and message boards and stuff, I decided to try a dual side 7.1. So putting one set, the side surrounds, in that same spot, kind of right here, equal to the side of this main row, and then putting the seventh, sixth and seventh speaker on the sidewall, but further back, and trying it like that. That didn't work. It still, again, caused weird sound issues. And then with them not being behind, you didn't really get the sound radiating behind you. Even with the bipole and dipole settings, it still would act up, and you wouldn't really get a good enveloping sound behind you. So I knew I had to have a set of speakers on the back wall to get that. But before I did that, I also played with an option of setting the speakers to 5.1 and running a bridge, like Y splitters for the two. So then I had the two sets here, but I just did them as a 5.1. So in effect, you got like one giant speaker on the side, and that was kind of okay. But again, it muddled the sound and it would create nulls in the sound area because, again, they're bipole dipole speakers, not direct radiating, and you're feeding the same signal to two speakers in two different locations, and you get the distance issues as well where it's not equal, and it caused a lot of problems as well with that. So finally, what I decided to do, well, actually I should say, I also tried to play with front wides for a while, where I moved those side speakers up kind of further in the room in front of where this main listening position is, and then keeping the others in the back and doing a 7.1 that way with front wides and then the two surround speakers. And that was even worse because, again, how close it is to my front speakers, I don't have enough separation. The width isn't long enough because this wall and this wall are kind of too close. If it would have been pushed out more, maybe that could have been viable. But it was so close that it just made it seem like my front speakers were way off over here to the sides. And it would just kind of blend that front image into that, and it didn't work either. So ultimately what I did is I decided, all right, I'm just going to get rid of two of those speakers, one set, and just stick with a 5.1. And I was kind of, I don't know, I fell into the trap of, well, 7.1, like that's what the standard is nowadays. And, you know, I should really have seven speakers. So I was kind of on the fence about the 5.1, but I decided to try it and just do that. And ultimately what happened is it turned out to be the best option for the room here. Uh, so what I did initially, again, I played with positioning, and what I eventually found out was the biggest issue with the sound factor was this notched cutout over here, because the distance was so great between that speaker and the listening position, and so short for this one, that it didn't really work with the sound. You know, it would just you would always seem to feel further away on this side because that speaker was further away. Even when I would bring the trim levels up to match, you know, it would still just not seem right. So what I eventually did after some playing around and, you know, again, a little more research and looking into things, is I moved the speakers to the back wall, which is where they're at now, and I just lined them up so they were directly in line with my front speakers. And you'll notice they are further up on the wall instead of being, you know, ear level, they're up towards the top. And I experimented with that as well, but the main reason why I didn't bring them down is because where they're lined up, my display cabinet that's right over here is too tall. So there'd be no way I could keep them perfectly even with my front speakers that would make the actual angles correct, you know, in equal distance to this main listening position with that being there. So I ended up having to push them up high enough so it cleared the space there. But even in doing that, I have these set on bipole mode, and I have them flip flopped, as I talked about again in my detailed home theater tour. The right speaker is actually the left speaker, and the left speaker is actually the right speaker. So that way, on these Polk FXI series speakers, you have one side that has a main woofer and a tweeter, and then on the other side you have a port and an alt like a secondary tweeter. And normally you would have the main tweeter and main woofer facing outwards, so then it would bounce off a sidewall to create like you know, diffuse sound coming in. But after experimenting and playing around with the speakers back there, I found that having the main woofer and the main tweeter aiming towards the listening positions from both sides created a better sound field for back there. And since they are in bipole mode, they still do allow some more diffuse sound coming around from the opposite ends that bounce off this wall and head kind of out in that kind of, you know, nook that's over in this area. Um, but they sound a lot better. And having them where they're at and just having it a 5.1 instead of trying to fit in the 7 speaker setup, um, it creates a much better surround sound situation. And it basically creates it in the box right here of where my seating area is. Um, yeah, we have random people down here that sit over in the open space. Yeah, the audio is not going to be as good. But I found for this main couch here and for the couch that's back up against the wall back there, even though those speakers are up there, they're up high enough. And the way that they're positioned, you're not getting blaring sound right in your ear like you would if they were at ear level right behind you, you know, like 6 inches from your head. You know, you're still getting a handful of feet, you know, 5 feet or whatever on each side that's going up the wall. So it really worked out that way to set it up like this. And I also have, I say a 7 or a 5.1 system, but I actually have 4 subwoofers. And again, when I had this theater set up originally, when it was flip flopped the other way, those subwoofers were spread out more around the room. I kind of did a subwoofer crawl, you know, and everything, and set them up in different spots throughout the room. And probably at that point, the bass was maybe a little more even and distributed better here in the room. But when I flip flopped it and have it set up the way it is now, I just have them along the front stage. I have, you know, one under each one of my main towers, and then one to the left and right of the center channel. So it's in like a third of the way into the room. And yes, it would probably be better to have some speaker or subs in the back or on the side walls or in a corner or something. It might create a little more even subwoofer output. But having them where they're at still works fine for this situation. And aesthetically, it looks nicer, and they're not in random spots that's going to cause problems for seating or for my equipment rack or my media shelf. You know, they're all kind of in one spot here at the front and it, kind of works like that. So anyways, yeah, so that's kind of why did the 5.1, and that's kind of what I've settled on here in the home theater. And kind of a little history of some other ways I had it set up in the past. I do think, potentially if I wanted to, which I don't really have any interest in doing it right now, I could potentially do not a, Atmos with like a 5.1.4 setup, but I could potentially do two overhead speakers, maybe right over the middle here. But I don't really think it's worth it. And again, because my ceilings are so low, I'm only sitting with like from my head where I'm sitting up here is probably not even 5 feet to the roof, maybe 5 feet. Um, but when just floor to ceiling, it's only like 7 feet, 6 foot 10, 6 foot 11, 7 feet tall, roughly with the drop ceiling. I just don't think there's enough space to do that. But if I really wanted to, I could maybe put in ceiling speakers that don't hang down in the drop ceiling, and maybe it would work. But even then, I don't think it's worth the time and effort and the you know return I would get on something like that. I don't think would actually be viable enough. Um, anyways, but yeah, so that's to kind of wrap up. That's my just kind of little story of why I have a 5.1 versus Atmos and things like that here in the home theater. So with that being said, I'd like to say thanks to everyone who's subscribed to my channel and watched these videos so far. And be on the lookout for the next couple of videos coming up soon. Thank you.